When I was 18, I got arrested for trying to steal a phone from Walmart. It was the dumbest thing I had ever done, and I still hate even admitting it. I was with two friends, and the whole thing started as one of those stupid ideas. I thought I could open the package, slip the phone into my hoodie pocket, and walk out like nothing happened. Instead, store security stopped me before I even made it to the exit. I did not know they watched the cameras that closely. Within an hour, I was sitting in the back of a police car with my hands cupped behind me, staring at the same parking lot I had driven into like a normal person earlier that day. It was a Friday night, which made everything worse. I kept thinking my parents would come get me or that I would just get a ticket and go home. But after I was taken to the station, processed, fingerprinted, and questioned, I was told I would be spending the weekend in county jail because court was not open until Monday. Hearing that made my stomach twist. I still remember the feeling of helplessness. I had never been in real trouble before. I had never even been suspended from school. And now I was being walked into a local jail in handcuffs over one of the most embarrassing decisions of my life. The booking process took forever. They took everything from me, including my clothes. Then they gave me an orange jumpsuit to wear. And that was when the seriousness of the situation finally became real to me. I remember changing into it and looking at myself for a second, feeling sick. When they finally brought me back to the holding area, I quickly realized that nobody else looked like me. I do not mean that in a better-than-them way. I just mean I looked young, scared, and completely out of place. Some of the men in there were older, bigger, covered in tattoos, and looked like truly dangerous and scary people. A lot of them were loud, acting like this was some fun place they had been to 10 times before. A few of them looked at me like they were annoyed I even existed. Some guys actually made fun of me, calling me pretty boy. I tried not to react, but I could feel my face getting hot. I stare at the floor most of the time and try to look calm, but I am sure everyone could tell I was terrified. After a while, a new group of people who had been arrested were brought into the day room, and we were all told we could make phone calls. I called my parents, and my mom answered. The sound of her voice almost made me break down. I told her where I was and what happened, and then my dad got on the phone. He was not yelling, which somehow made it worse. He just sounded disappointed. He told me they had already called a lawyer, and that I would most likely be out on bail by Monday after I saw the judge. Monday felt so far away, though. I wanted to ask them to get me out sooner, but I knew there was nothing they could do. After the call, I had to go back into the day room and pretend I was not about to panic or cry. Later that night, they assigned me to a cell. My cellmate was a man in his 40s who told me his name was Bob. I almost did not believe that was really his name. At first, I was almost relieved because he was not yelling or acting aggressive like some of the others. He had a calm voice and talked to me like a normal person. He asked what I was in for, and I stupidly told him. He laughed a little and said that was nothing and that I would be fine. For the first hour or so, he actually made me feel less alone. He told me how to deal with the routine when meals came, how to keep to myself, and not to let anyone see me looking too nervous. I remember thinking maybe I got lucky, but that feeling did not last. As the hours dragged on, Bob got too comfortable with me. He started asking personal questions like where I lived, if I had a girlfriend, what school I went to, and if I still live with my parents. I gave short answers, but he kept pushing. Then he started making comments about how young I looked and how I did not belong there. At first, it sounded like an older person being concerned, but then it started sounding creepy. He would sit too close to me on the lower bunk when we talked. He touched my shoulder more than once, and one time he put his hand on my knee while laughing at something he said. I moved away right away, and he smiled like he knew exactly how uncomfortable he was making me feel. From then on, I dreaded every second the cell door was closed. The day room became the only place where I felt like I could breathe, even though that place was terrible too. I would wait for the doors to open just so I did not have to be alone with him. The days and nights blended together, and it all felt like one long day because there was no sunlight in that depressing place. The lights never fully turned off. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like Bob was watching me. One time, during rest time, I do not even know if it was nighttime, I opened my eyes and saw him looking down at me from the top bunk. He saw me wake up, and said he could not sleep either. I did not answer him. Those 48 hours felt longer than any full week of my life. By the time I finally saw the judge, I was exhausted but excited to leave. I barely remember what was said. I just remember hearing that I was being released. Later that day, my dad picked me up. When I got into his car, he was not angry. He was strangely understanding, but still disappointed. I did not want to talk about jail, Bob, or anything that happened. I wanted to shower, sleep in my own bed, and pretend the whole thing had just been a bad dream. A few days later, I got a follow request on Instagram from a fake-looking account. My profile was public at the time, so random accounts were not unusual. It had no real name and no posts, and the profile picture looked like a dark, blurry room. I ignored it. Later that night, I got a message from the account. When I opened it, it was a selfie from Bob. His face was close to the camera with that same little smile he kept giving me in the cell. Under it, he had written, "Miss you already." I blocked the account immediately and threw my phone onto the bed. I felt violated in a way. He knew my real name. He found my profile, and I had no idea how. 2 days later, I came home from work in the late afternoon. It was a foggy day, and my parents were both still at work. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an old, beat-up car parked across the street. Someone was sitting inside with their head down. I sat in my car for a second watching it. I could not see their face, but something about the way they would not move felt concerning. I went inside quickly and locked the front door behind me. A few minutes later, while I was standing in the kitchen trying to tell myself I was being paranoid, I heard the front door knob rattle. Instead of knocking or ringing the bell, whoever was outside was turning the door handle back and forth like they were checking if it was unlocked. Then they stopped. Not even 30 seconds later, I heard the back door knob do the same thing. That was when everything became real, and I called 911. As strange as that felt after spending a weekend in jail, I whispered at first because I was afraid whoever it was would hear me. I told the operator someone was trying to get into my house. While I was on the phone, the doorbell rang. The operator asked if I could see who it was. I told her I was too scared to check. I told her I thought it was the man I shared a jail cell with. She told me not to answer the door and to wait for the officers. By the time the officers arrived, the car was gone and whoever had been at the door was gone too. I told the officers everything. I told them about the arrest, the weekend in jail, Bob, the Instagram message, and the car outside. The second I admitted I had just been in jail, I felt their attitude change. They were not rude exactly, but they did not seem very eager to help either. One of them asked if I was sure I was not just shaken up from the weekend, which really made me angry. Another asked if I had given this guy my full name. I said no. They left me with a report number, and that was basically it. For the next week, nothing happened, and I tried to convince myself it was over. Then one night, I went to a small bar with friends. They were not the friends who knew about the arrest. Outside of my family and the friends who already knew, I did not tell anyone else. We were standing near the pool table when I looked toward the far end of the bar and saw Bob sitting alone. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled down low and a dark jacket, like he was trying to hide who he was. But I knew it was him. He was not looking directly at me when I first saw him, but a few seconds later, he lifted his head, and when he saw me looking at him, he smiled. The fear on my face must have been obvious because my friends asked what was wrong, and I told them there was a guy I did not want to deal with and that I wanted to leave. We left through the front, and I kept expecting Bob to come out behind us. In the parking lot, I told my friends I was calling an Uber home, but to wait with me. The second I got in the car, I called my parents and finally told them everything I had been leaving out. That night, they put their foot down. We went straight to the police station. This time, with my parents there and with the Instagram message still saved as a screenshot, they took it more seriously. I told them about the attempted break-in, the fake account, and seeing him at the bar. I signed a sworn statement, and eventually I was able to get a temporary restraining order. That was when I found out Bob was not even his real name. I am not going to write his real name here. I also learned how easy it can be to find inmate and arrest information after someone gets booked. My guess is that once he got released, he searched my name through public records or some jail-related system and found enough information to track me down. The restraining order seemed to work because I never saw him again after that. But for years afterward, this whole thing definitely stayed with me. Getting arrested for stealing from Walmart was humiliating, and it could have ruined my life in the obvious legal ways. But the worst part had almost nothing to do with court or the charges. It was realizing that one stupid decision put me in a locked room with someone who should have never had access to me, and then gave him just enough information to follow me back into real life. This is the first time I am trying to explain something by writing it down. I also want to say that I struggle to relive this memory. Whenever I start thinking about the possible harm that could have happened to my friend Laura and me, I start to get anxious and upset all over again. I will start from the beginning. Last summer, I started dating a guy who lived about an hour away from me. It only lasted a few months. I will be honest, it was a rebound relationship. The only reason I am mentioning him is because during this hour-long drive, I would always pass this giant building in the distance. Most of the drive was nothing but trees and huge open grass fields. When I was about 15 minutes away from his house, I would drive past that building. From the road, it looked like a building you would see in an old horror movie. It had tall curved roofs, small windows, and a giant cross at the highest point of the roof. The building fascinated me. I asked him once if he knew what the building was, and he had no idea. He said he thought it was an old prison, but honestly he did not know. He said it had been abandoned his whole life, and he never cared enough to find out what it was. That was one of the many differences between him and me. I saw that building one time, and I wanted to know everything about it. After he and I stopped talking, I still thought about that old building sometimes. I told my friend Laura about it, and she seemed just as interested as I was. We tried looking it up online, but we could not find any clear information about what the building had been used for. Honestly, we probably did not search that hard. Neither of us was the type to do deep internet research, and when no easy information appeared, we gave up searching. However, we were not ready to give up on the building. That was when Laura made an interesting suggestion. She suggested we just drive out to the building and check it out ourselves. She said, "It is not that far away, and if it is abandoned, nobody will be there." I was unsure about it, not because I did not want to go, but because I do not really take risks. I do not do dangerous things often, and possibly breaking into a building is a huge risk for someone like me. As I write this now, I feel like an idiot, but back then, going in the middle of the night seemed like a better idea. My thinking was that if there was security, they would probably be gone after dark. I know it was not the best thinking, but that is where my mind went. A few nights later, we made the trip at 1 o'clock in the morning. We put fresh batteries in our flashlights and got ourselves excited for an adventure. Laura parked the car on the side of the road. She did not want to drive all the way up to the building in case there were cameras. It took us almost 10 minutes to walk from the roadside to the front door. When we got to the front door, I was desperately searching for a sign above or near it. There was nothing I could see anywhere. Even standing right at the door, we still could not tell what the building was. Laura walked up to the front door and tried opening it. Surprisingly, it opened immediately. There was a lock on the door, but it was not locked. The smell of mold and old wood was overwhelming. With our flashlights on, you could see dust floating everywhere. After walking through the door, it became obvious what the building was. It was clearly an old prison. There was a door straight ahead with bars on the window and a giant lock on it. This door was not locked either. It was not even closed. I was starting to feel nervous about going into this place, but Laura kept moving forward, so I followed her. We walked through several smaller rooms and eventually entered a large room with many jail cells lining the walls. The building was also covered with debris. Pieces of the walls and ceiling were scattered everywhere. It looked like the place was literally falling apart. Laura wanted to keep going, but I was ready to leave. With all the debris around us, I did not feel safe. I told Laura the ceiling could collapse at any moment. She laughed at me and called me a nervous wreck. She was not wrong. She promised we would only stay a little longer. I was hesitant, but I agreed. It could not have been more than 3 minutes later when we heard a loud crashing sound. It stopped both of us immediately. I instantly started panicking. I could not stop imagining the worst. Laura tried to stay calm and reasonable. She said something probably collapsed and we were hearing the echo. I gave her a look that clearly said it was time to leave. Whether something had collapsed or something worse was happening, it was time to go. We started heading back the way we came. In the doorway of the large room with the cells, Laura saw a person standing at the far end of the room. When Laura told me, she told me not to panic. I cannot even explain how unbelievably terrifying it is to be inside a giant abandoned prison in the middle of the night and suddenly see a person standing 20 feet away from you. We froze. The person eventually raised his hands in a non-threatening way and spoke. He said his name was Mike and that he meant no harm. Laura immediately started questioning Mike, asking why he was in the building and warning him that if he came any closer, we would pepper spray him. Mike quickly became defensive. He claimed he was a security guard for the building. He said he was supposed to stop anyone who broke into the building and call the police to pick them up. He started explaining how the building had been broken into many times, so they had to take steps to keep people out. He sounded confident. All of his answers came smoothly, and he never stumbled over his words. I was panicking at this point, thinking I was about to be detained. Laura leaned over and whispered that she did not trust him. Mike continued walking toward us while speaking calmly. He said he was going to escort us out of the building with just a warning. He claimed we looked like nice young women, and there was no reason to involve the police. I started thanking him. He laughed and told me not to worry about it. Laura asked if he could move so we could leave, and he started acting strange. He said he was sorry, but he could not let us leave that way. When we asked why, he said part of the ceiling had collapsed and there was no way through anymore. He said he was going to take us out through a much safer back route. Laura looked doubtful. I just wanted to leave. When he walked past us, he did seem strange. By that, I mean he was not dressed the way you expect a security guard to dress. He was wearing jeans, white sneakers, and a black sweatshirt with a flannel shirt over it. Laura even pointed out that his clothes looked strange for a security guard. He laughed and, in that smooth, confident voice, said he could wear whatever he wanted because this job was usually boring. We kept walking deeper into the building, and it felt like we were moving farther away from where we needed to go. Every time we asked where we were going, he would just say, "Do not worry, we are almost there." A few minutes later, we reached a long, narrow hallway with a door at the end. The hallway was so small that two people could not walk side by side. He opened the door at the end of the hallway, and there was a long staircase leading down. It was dark, so dark that you could barely see anything. Instead of continuing to lead us, he stepped aside of the doorway and said, "After you." We just stared at him. Laura asked, "Why would we go down there?" He laughed and said she was being silly. Yes, he actually used the word silly. Laura finally stood her ground and said we were not going any farther. That was when I stepped in and asked if he could lead the way instead. He did not answer right away, but then he agreed. He took 1 or 2 steps down, and then said he needed to make sure the door locked behind all of us in case someone broke in. Then he came back up, gently grabbed my arm, and tried to guide me down first. I hated that. Laura screamed and shoved him away, which broke his grip on my arm. Because Laura was standing a little higher than him, she managed to make him stumble when she pushed him. She looked at me and yelled for me to run. "Laura!" And I ran back the way we had come. Eventually, we made it back to the room with the jail cells and ran through the doorway where we had first met Mike. We made it all the way back to the front entrance, and at no point did we see any collapsed area like Mike had claimed. The whole time we were running, we could not hear anything behind us. Even though we did not hear Mike, I felt like he was right behind me. It was like I could still feel his hand touching my arm. We sprinted to the car and drove away quickly. During the entire long drive home, we kept checking the mirrors to make sure he was not somehow following us. About a week later, I contacted the police in that area. I admitted that I had broken into the building and that the security guard had tried to lead me into a dark basement. The officer sounded speechless. I thought it was because I admitted breaking into the building, but almost seemed like he did not care about that part. He told me the old prison did not have any security guards and that it was not even watched by cameras or patrols. He said whoever we met that night was not a safe person and that my friend and I were lucky to still be alive. Even remembering those words from the officer makes me want to cry. I think one of the scariest parts of this nightmare is that we still have no idea where this guy came from. He looked a little too clean and normal to just be some random man living in an abandoned prison. If I think about it too much, I can almost feel his hand grabbing my arm again, and I start to panic. I know I will never get answers about that horrible night. I am just grateful that I am still here and able to tell my story. Several years ago, I moved across the country. I worked as a corrections officer at a local jail. I had been there about a week when I met Edgar. He seemed like a decent guy. Just because someone is in jail does not automatically mean they're violent criminals. In Edgar's case, he was there for breaking parole, not for violence. Every time I crossed paths with Edgar, he was respectful, called me sir, and never caused trouble. During one of those first weeks there, completely out of nowhere, Edgar asked how Stan was doing. I just stared at him in disbelief. I have a brother named Stan, but I could not understand how Edgar would know something like that. This jail where I worked was almost 1,000 miles away from my hometown. The people I worked with did not even know about my brother. I remember ignoring him and continuing my work. As impossible as it seemed, I convinced myself it had to be a crazy coincidence. Maybe he was talking about someone or something else. A few days later, I crossed paths with Edgar again, and this time he asked if Diana still lived by the lake. Now he had my full attention. My mother's name is Diana, and she lives by a lake. I pulled him aside and asked how he knew that name. He just shrugged and said he did not know. In many jails and prisons, inmates share information about other inmates and even about officers. But in this case, there was no way this man could have learned information this personal. It made no sense. Nobody in town knew who I was. I did not have social media. I was not even very talkative. This felt strange and like a complete invasion of my privacy. After he asked about my mother, I did some research. As unlikely as it seemed, I thought maybe there was a chance Edgar was from my hometown. After checking his file, I learned he had been born and raised right there. According to everything in his records, he had never even been to my side of the country. Then one day, he asked about my nephew. He asked if he still liked baseball. At that point, I was completely disturbed. There was no way this man could know these things about my family. I went to my supervisor after that and told her about Edgar and this strange game he seemed to be playing with me. She dismissed it. She said he was probably trying to make me react so he could sue the jail. I did not believe that, but I accepted it because I felt like I had no choice. I continued seeing Edgar every day, and I kept waiting for him to mention another member of my family, but he never did. He stayed respectful, always smiling and never aggressive. Not long after that, Edgar was finally released. On his way out, he said goodbye to me and then said something that stayed with me. He said, "Maybe I will see you around." I do not know why, but it made me uncomfortable. Maybe it was a strange smile on his face when he said it. I do not know. It just felt threatening somehow. A few months passed after Edgar was released. By then, I had fully settled into my job and my new home. I started dating someone, and I spent certain nights of the week at her place. One morning while I was there, I got a notification on my phone. Someone had triggered my Ring camera at my house. They rang the doorbell. They stood there completely still for a strangely long time, and then they rang the bell again. This time they spoke into the camera. In a soft voice, the person said, "You home?" Clearly I was not. Then the person started talking about selling meat from his truck. He pointed away from the camera and said he had a lot of meat in his truck and was going door to door trying to sell it. He apologized for bothering me and then left. I ignored the whole thing. It was not the first time someone had tried selling something at my door, so it did not seem that strange to me, even if the man himself seemed odd. Even though it was morning, the shadows on the camera made it hard to see his face. It also did not help that he had his hood pulled up, not exactly a trustworthy look for someone trying to sell products. The next night, I stayed at my girlfriend's house again. A little after 2 o'clock in the morning, I got another notification on my phone. Someone was at the door. When I opened the camera feed, nobody was there. Somehow the motion sensor had gone off. I had heard of this happening to other people before, but it had never happened to me. I ignored it and went back to sleep. The next night, I was home alone because I had to work early at the jail the next morning. At almost the exact same time as the night before, around 2 o'clock in the morning, my doorbell rang. I opened the camera feed, and it was the same man from the day before, the man who claimed he was selling meat. Before I could say anything, he rang the bell again and spoke into the camera. "Hello, I have some meat in the truck that I am trying to sell. Is anybody home?" Before I could respond, he spoke again and said, "You should open the door so you can see what I have for sale." I am not completely sure, but it looked like he reached for the doorknob after saying that. My Ring camera lets me speak through it. So I warned the man that I was law enforcement and that he needed to leave my property before I called the police. At first, he did not move at all. Then, a few seconds later, he slowly lifted his head. With a huge smile on his face, I realized exactly who it was. It was Edgar, the polite man from the jail who knew far too much about my personal life. By that time, I had almost forgotten about Edgar. He did not run away like many criminals would. Instead, he slowly turned around and walked away. I noticed he did not get into a truck or any vehicle at all. He had claimed he had meat in a truck, but I watched him simply walk away into the night. I was pretty shaken after that night, mostly because I had no idea what Edgar was capable of. He had not been violent in the past, but these were clearly not the actions of a mentally stable person. I called my brother Stan the next day. I asked him if he knew a man named Edgar, and my brother said he had no idea who he was. When I sent him a picture of Edgar, he confirmed he definitely did not know him. I did some more digging after that night and found some strange information about Edgar. The man had no known family, no previous addresses, and when his parole officer checked his listed address, he was not living there. I wish I could say that was the end of the story, but I think Edgar decided to visit me one last time. About a month after his last visit, someone rang the doorbell at my girlfriend's house at 10:30 at night. I rushed to the front door, thinking maybe it was some kind of mistake. When I opened the door, nobody was there. When I looked down the street, I saw someone walking away. The person looked similar in size to Edgar, but it was too dark to tell for sure. I shouted at the person, but they did not react and just kept walking. I did not chase after them, because people often walk through that neighborhood at night. I was not sure if it was Edgar or just a neighbor. I went back inside, locked the door, and told my girlfriend it was nothing. I stayed awake the entire night, waiting for another visit, but nobody ever came. I never found out what happened to Edgar. It is like he disappeared completely. It bothers me to think that this man knew where I lived. And if that really was him at my girlfriend's house, I cannot even imagine how he found that information. It made me feel like he was stalking me. For months, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. What bothers me even more is that I still have no idea how this man from jail knew my brother's name, my mother's name, and where she lived. I am still terrified that one night he will show up at my mother's house, and I will not be there to protect her. I do not know why he chose to mess with me. I have not slept well in years. I like to tell myself that he moved to another town under a different name and got arrested there. The hope that he is back in jail is one of the only things that keeps me from thinking about this even more than I already do.